born diabetes and the first step towards them receiving a pump that's known as an artificial pancreas. Experts say the technology will be game-changing for treatment. Our correspondent Dominic Hughes explains.
More than 300,000 people are living with type 1 diabetes in the UK. The most common way of managing it is through insulin injections that keep blood glucose levels stable. In a device called a hybrid closed-loop system holds out the promise of changing this. It continually monitors a person's blood glucose and automatically adjusts the amount of insulin given to them through a pump. It can help prevent life-threatening surges or sudden falls in levels. The mass rollout of the device follows a successful pilot by NHS England. The pumps won't suit everyone, but for those who do get them, it should mean fewer injections.
Dominic Hughes reporting. We'll be hearing in more detail about the new device for type 1 diabetes and this accidental treatment. The time now is 6 minutes past 6. Let's find out about the weather from Simon King. Morning, Simon.
Good morning, Martha. Today should be a little bit quieter for many of us. There's plenty of dry weather around. For southeast and eastern England, however, we have got a few showers this morning. Those are a little bit heavy and they're going to drift their way north and eastward and clear away pretty quickly. So for most of the day it's going to be dry and there'll be some sunny spells with maximum temperatures getting up to about 13 to 15 degrees. In southwest England it's a dry start with sunny spells, but the cloud will thicken as we go into lunchtime and this afternoon, and with that there'll be some rain arriving as well. So initially towards the Isles of Scilly by mid-morning and then spreading into Cornwall by lunchtime and then moving slow further north and eastward throughout the afternoon. Maximum temperatures 8 to 11 Celsius. Well, for Wales, the Midlands, north west and north east England, we've got some varying cloud. Dry for most this morning, but thicker cloud with some rain in the northwest. There'll be some sunny spells developing for most, and just the odd isolated shower into the afternoon. But then the cloud will thicken in South Wales and the South Midlands, temperatures of 11 to 14 degrees. And for Scotland and Northern Ireland, quite cloudy. Some light patchy rain this morning. This becomes heavier and more persistent in northeastern Scotland, where we've got a rather brisk east or northeasterly wind, feeling chilly in the north and east of Scotland, 6 or 7 degrees, but 10 or 11 degrees elsewhere.
Thank you, Simon. It is 8 minutes past 6. Let's take our first look at the morning papers, what's making the news websites as well. There's a picture of J.K. Rowling on many front pages. On the Mail, it comes with the headline, "Arrest Me." Ms Rowling, who lives in Edinburgh, believes the anti-hate crime law that has come into force in Scotland is a threat to free speech. She said she looks forward to being arrested. What she's written about some trans people who are protected under the new legislation qualifies as an offence. The Mail and the Telegraph both highlight support from Rishi Sunak for the author's defiance. The Prime Minister is quoted saying, "People should not be criminalised for stating simple facts on biology. We believe in free speech in this country," he says, and Conservatives will protect.
The Guardian has conducted analysis which suggests that the government has made zero progress on half of the Conservatives' levelling up goals. The study indicates that of the 12 initial targets set for less prosperous regions of Britain, nothing's been achieved in education, skills, well-being, local pride, housing and health. An academic is quoted accusing ministers of failing to turn the tide on regional inequalities, but the Levelling Up Department denies failure, saying the plan is long-term and it is making significant progress in its mission.
Doctor won't see you now is the Mirror's lead headline. It focuses on what it calls a GP appointment scandal, in which the paper says the number of patients in England waiting more than a month to see a GP has soared by up to 79%. The Department of Health tells the paper it's committed to improving access to family doctors and is delivering 50 million more GP appointments per year.
The Sun's furious that following on from the St George's Cross England football kit row, the Union flag has undergone a similar colour change on Team GB's outfits for the Paris Olympics. The paper reveals that what it calls the iconic red, white and blue design has been replaced in a dizzying rebrand incorporating pink and purple, as well as meaningless squiggles.
What is a meaningful squiggle? It makes people ask. Now, Global Glut turns solar panels into common garden fencing options is a headline in the Financial Times. It says China's flooded the markets with low-cost panels, and people in Europe are using them as fences because they're cheaper. The paper suggests they still work, but they're not aligned exactly to the sun.
Finally, the Times asks, looking for Britain's top beauty spot? It's Croydon. But the paper isn't praising the South London borough's scenic qualities. New researchers found the area has the highest concentration of beauty jobs anywhere in the UK. The celebrity hairdresser James Brown, who grew up in Croydon, is quoted as saying, "I always find it inspirational. It's near enough to London to keep up with the latest trends. It has its own scene."
11 minutes past 6. How will Iran react to the killing of two of its most senior commanders in a military raid on its consulate building in Damascus, which is widely assumed to have been carried out by the Israelis? The world is watching and waiting along with them. Our diplomatic correspondent James Lander. What do we know so far about what the Iranians are telling us, James?
Well, at the moment, the response has been a simple rhetorical one. The Foreign Minister, Hussein Amir Abdullahian, who said that the attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus in Syria violated all diplomatic norms and international treaties. And Iran's ambassador there, who's on the scene very quickly, said that Iran will respond in what he said would be the same magnitude and harshness as the attack which Iran and Syria and everybody else is blaming on Syria, on Iran, but on Israel rather, but Israel, as I said, as always in these circumstances, refusing to make any comment. So the big question, as you say, is how does Iran respond to this? It has many options. It could step up attacks by its proxy Hezbollah from Lebanon on Israel. There could be, a cyber attack. Most analysts seem to be suspecting that the sort of most likely response could be further attacks by its pro-Iranian proxies against US targets in Syria, in Iraq. We haven't had that many for a while, but that is an area where you could get, you've still got US troops, some based in Syria and Iraq, and they could again become targets to attacks as a response to this. But at the moment, we've got to work out how Iran wants to respond, because the dilemma it's got is it wants to respond in kind, but it doesn't want to trigger all-out war with Israel. All the signals show that.
The calculations about this are fascinating on both sides, aren't they? With quite a lot of analysts suggesting that Israel is goading Iran. What would be the logic of that, if that is the case?
Essentially, Israel is testing Iran. Iran has made it very clear that it does not want all-out war. Hezbollah, if you think about it, has been remarkably restrained thus far, although there's been continued exchanges of fire over that border in southern Lebanon, and people have died, people have been evacuated, but it has been a calibrated exchange of fire by both sides, because Iran and its proxies have made it clear that they don't want this conflict with Hamas to escalate. Israel, it is understood, is testing that resolve and to see where the limits of that position is, because Israel does see this not just as a straightforward conflict with Hamas in Gaza. It does see itself in conflict with what Iran calls its axis of resistance. And I think this is almost the forgotten shadow war that's going on at the moment, where we're so focused a lot of the time on Gaza that we forget this wider conflict is already taking place. You speak to some analysts and they still retain huge concern that ultimately this conflict will spread and become a regional conflict. There will be some kind of Israeli invasion of Lebanon. In other words, this could get much worse. So the stakes are incredibly high.
Which is why, James, we're going to be talking about that at 10 past 8 with the former head of the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, Sir John Stores. James Lander, thank you.
Time now is 6:15. Tens of thousands of people with type 1 diabetes are to be offered a new technological device to help manage the condition, which constantly monitors blood glucose levels and adjusts insulin levels. We can talk now to our health correspondent Dominic Hughes. And this comes after a pilot, doesn't it, done by NHS England, and it could make a big difference to sufferers.
Yeah, I think it really could, Martha. I mean, it's worth perhaps reminding ourselves about what type 1 diabetes is. It's a condition that affects more than 300,000 people in the UK, including around about 29,000 children. And what it means is that their pancreas fails to produce insulin, which is this absolutely vital hormone that helps turn food into energy. So that means they have to closely monitor levels of sugar or glucose in the blood, and they have to give themselves insulin every day of their lives, either through injections or via a pump. So this technology does that automatically because it virtually mimics the function of a pancreas, which is why people are calling it an artificial pancreas. It does still require information on food intake to be inputted at meal times to work accurately though, but there's a sensor under the skin that automatically measures blood sugar levels. Readings are then sent wirelessly to this pump, which is outside the body, which is, you can carry on a belt, which calculates the amount of insulin required, and then users then monitor readings on a smartphone, and that then allows them to input the amount of carbohydrates being eaten at meals. But in the meantime, the pump is delivering insulin as and when the body needs it.
And how soon are people, I know some people have already had it under the pilot, but how soon will other sufferers from type 1 diabetes be able to get hold of it?
Yeah, some people listening to this might be saying, well, I know people who've got this who weren't on the pilot, so some people have been... Though, what we're seeing today is the beginnings of people being contacted to see if they're eligible. But it could take 5 years before everyone has the opportunity to get one, because there are challenges sourcing enough of the devices and the need plus to train more staff in how to use them. So over the next 5 years, people there'll be a start to contact them next month, but over the next 5 years they'll roll them out to everyone who's eligible.
Dominic, many thanks. More at 10 to 8.
17 minutes past 6 now. Prices in our shops are rising at their slowest rate for more than 2 years. Sean Farrington's got the latest on that, the latest figures, and the rest of the day's business news. Morning, Sean.
Morning to you, Nick. So yeah, the latest industry figures showing that these prices that take into account groceries, non-food items as well, they rose by 1.3% in the year to March. Now in February that figure was 2.5%. We've not seen prices rising this slowly since the end of 2021. I've got Helen Dickinson with me, who's Chief Executive of the British Retail Consortium that helped put these numbers together. Morning, Helen.
Good morning, Sean.
What's driving this?
Well, it's good news for consumers. Certainly we're seeing intense competition across the retail industry, and a number of those global shocks and commodity price increases that really spiked inflation about 12, 18 months ago. The impact of those is really starting to slow.
Yeah, I mean, better news for shoppers maybe, because as you say, a year ago we were maybe talking about food prices going up by 15%. The food prices, they're not lower than they were before all of this. They're still going up more than they were a couple of years ago. Are we going to get to a point where, when those global shocks calm down, as they have done, that people can see their food prices getting back to closer to where they were before all of this?
No, unfortunately not. We're not going to see... We will continue to see shop prices not rising as quickly as they have done over the last year, 18 months or so, but we won't see significant falls in prices back to pre-COVID sort of levels. To do that would require the sort of deflation that we haven't seen since the Great Depression, and the reason for that is that lots of the costs like wages and some of the impacts of things like energy and all of those other commodity increases through the supply chains, those are baked in now, so they won't reverse, but we will just see the impact of them starting to slow, which is, at the end of the day, means that inflation levels will not be as high as they were before.
Yeah, and so maybe more at the levels we're seeing in your report today, but some of those things that are baked in, you talk about with wage rises, with other costs. We've heard of many businesses on our high streets in recent weeks talking about going up at the moment. And business rates, for example, do you expect those to push prices higher when we're aiming to try and reduce inflation at the moment as a nation?
Yeah, I think a lot of those kick in April, so the The National Living Wage rise takes effect now. The business rates uplift, which was based on inflation back in September, which was nearly 7%, the overall sort of CPI inflation index. We've got new border checks coming in terms of imports from the EU, so all of those things on the upward pressure trajectory for slowing the progress that we're seeing on shop prices. So the risks are on the upside as we move into the second quarter of the year. So that's not such good news, but the intensity of the competition that we're seeing between businesses and the fact that the cost of living crisis impact is still with a lot of customers means that retailers will be very keen to keep their customers' businesses that well and keep prices low for consumers.
Yeah, competition for shoppers' business, but also competition for staff as well this year. We've already seen supermarkets who are battling to keep their staff, give multiple pay rises this year. Do you expect that to continue throughout the year?
I think the labour market still is really tight. There are over 100,000 vacancies across the retail industry, and that is not just within stores, that is within head offices, within distribution, so right across the piece, and that will keep the impact of labour costs higher than it would otherwise be on prices for consumers. But that's good news for those that work in the industry, and it also is part of the sort of wider transformation that we're seeing in the nature of jobs in retail as more businesses invest more in their digital offer, both for their customers and their infrastructure within the businesses too. So higher paid jobs for those that work in retail.
Helen, thank you. Helen Dickinson, Chief Executive of the British Retail Consortium. Let's have a little bit more of a look at the state of the labour market in the UK at the moment with Paul Waters, who is the Senior Director for S&P Global Ratings in Europe. Now, S&P is one of those companies that gives a credit rating to countries. We'll look in detail at how those countries' economies and finances are getting on. Paul, very good morning to you.
Morning, Sean.
Your latest bit of research about the whole of Europe this morning, but what are your main conclusions about the UK?
Well, I mean, the UK is, as we just heard, I mean, we've got some sort of structural problems that we're coming out of. We're still seeing supply-side weakness, as we just heard, tight labour market. Service sector still, we're seeing price pressure still coming through there. So overall, despite the good numbers we've just seen this morning, we're still expecting pressure to sort of persist on the core inflation numbers, which basically means that from our point of view, under our base case, we think rates cuts will come perhaps still a little bit more slowly than the market's expecting. First cut probably in August in the UK. But at the same time, we continue to expect the growth in the UK to pick up slowly, accelerating perhaps more in 25 and 26.
Right, okay, so that's the interest rate perspective of it. When we look at the jobs market, where wages are going and whether that is good for the UK at the moment or not. Is the job market helping businesses across the UK grow the way they need to?
Well, I mean, obviously from a demand side, it's good, positive from a business perspective. But looking at the cost side of things, if we're still seeing sort of wage growth at sort of 4 or 5%, then clearly that becomes an issue if depending on the ability of companies to protect their margins and increase prices. So, what we have seen, and of course this has been one of the remarkable things in recent years, is that companies have, by and large, been able to push prices through to their own customers quite well. I think given the supply side problems have been easing somewhat, looking at shipping and the like, apart from the Red Sea. But I think the some companies will find it harder to pass through costs. So profitability may suffer for some sectors. But
are businesses getting more productive then? Are they? This battle that we've had to try and be more productive as a nation for so long now. Given those various things you're describing there, are you seeing the businesses up their productivity?
No, I'm sure you're quite right. I mean, productivity is interesting. Productivity in Europe and the UK is low, certainly very low relative to the US, where we're seeing, you know, the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of expenditure on investments, and that's feeding through to improved productivity, which we're not really seeing in Europe. So actually, that is still quite a headwind, actually, from the point of view of the overall growth.
And why is that holding us back? What is the key issue there with that?
Well, I mean, that's the million-dollar question. I mean, I think there's a lot of different factors feeding into that. It is investment, you know, it is, you know, demographics, it is training, it is regulation. I mean, it's a lot of different factors which feed into ultimately. But there's a lot of academics scratching their heads trying to work out how we can actually improve productivity in Europe.
Yeah, a lot of bosses doing the same thing as well. Paul Waters, thank you, Senior Director there, S&P Global Ratings in Europe. Let's check in with George Godber, Fund Manager at Polar Capital. Morning, George.
Good morning, Sean.
Let's have a look at what's going on with Donald Trump's social media company. Had a bumper start talking a week ago of share prices rocketing and Donald Trump's stake being worth many billions. It's worth $1 billion less this morning after the share price fell by more than 20% yesterday on the stock markets in New York. What are we learning about the business?
I don't know, Sean. You've asked me many tricky questions. This one I'll scratch my head. It's a business that does about 4 million in revenue. It was 60 million last year, and it's still, even after that, full value of many billions of dollars. So it's a tough one to really work out, you know, how the valuation can be justified. So I guess watch the space to see where it settles.
We will continue to watch the space. George.
Well, I think what we might see is Inchcape sell their UK retail operations. We've had some reports of a US business called Donation bidding for their UK operations here, which is about 20% of the group. The US peers trade on a much higher multiple than Inchcape does, and as Inchcape focuses its operations out to Asia and Latin America, they may opportunistically take the chance to sell the UK business at a very healthy price.
Right, so not is this not a similar story to the one we've discussed in recent weeks, where maybe businesses feeling under pressure in the UK because they're seemingly valued at a bit of a discount compared to similar ones around the world?
I'm sure if you had the chief executive of Inchcape on, he would look with envy at the value of the US car retailers and what they trade at, which is usually about double the UK players, and that's why so many US businesses have been buying up UK assets, like Lookers was taken out last year, and Pendragon in the space, and others.
Just a brief one on water companies, George, as we've talked so much about Thames Water, and we'll do in the programme later as well. Now entering these last-ditch talks, have been reported trying to sort out its finances. What's investors' view on water companies, the state of that industry at the moment? Severn Trent United Utilities, listed on our stock market.
I think it's really important. I think the utility companies, the water companies, are very well held by many people. They're very popular with retail investors because they pay a decent dividend yield. The problems at Thames Water are very specific to bad management there and far too much leverage in that business.
Right.
So, in general, you're not seeing that investors in the market are worried about what's going on with Severn Trent and Pennon United Utilities. In fact, those are businesses we are going to be core to delivering our climate objectives and to improving our water network. So I think we are not seeing mass panic here, thankfully, at this stage, because Thames Water's troubles are still ongoing.
George, thanks very much. George Godber from Polar Capital. I'll be back after 7 o'clock.
With some more of your tricky questions, Sean. Thanks very much. Time now is 29 minutes past 6. And Rob's here with us. Good morning, Rob.
Good morning, Martha. Well, it's almost as if English football's championship is living in a parallel universe to the Premier League. 3 clubs competing for the top spot with very few points separating them, and therefore the positions frequently changing hands, as they did yesterday. Leicester moved from 3rd to 1st in the early afternoon with a 3-1 win against Norwich. Then Ipswich beat Southampton 3-2 in the early evening to return to the top, while later Leeds defeated Hull 3-1 and moved from 3rd back to 2nd. The match details as follows, with late goals featuring throughout. First for Ipswich, who were behind against Southampton until an equaliser midway through the second half, and then a 97th minute winner from Jeremy Sarmiento for their 3-2 win. An eventful match in an eventful season. Here's Ipswich manager Kieran McKenna.
Each game's been a cup final since the start. Honestly, the level's it's such a step up for us. The competition is so hard. There's no way that we can ramp it up anymore for the last 6 games. There's no need to. We give every game the absolute utmost respect. I think the players have put every ounce of effort into every single game, and we'll do that for the last 6 games and keep trying to enjoy it and see where it takes us.
Leeds also left it late against Hull, 1-1 with 2 minutes to go, but then a Crescencio Somerville penalty and a strike from Dan James from all of 40 yards ensured that 3-1 win and the retention of their automatic promotion place. 6 games to go for Leeds. Manager Daniel Farke knows there's tension ahead.
Yes, that's right. So we are starting right now next weekend to the crunch time period of the season, but not tonight. Tonight I'm just happy to have the 3 points. So the last days were so crazy. Lots of traveling, not much time to prepare. Yes, for the weekend we can then speak about the crunch time, but not tonight.
And Leicester's third goal against Norwich came in the 93rd minute, but this was a more straightforward win with Leicester dominant throughout, especially in the second half. So, first placed Ipswich leads by a point, with Leicester a further point behind, but with a game in hand. Southampton a distant fourth, with West Bromwich Albion and Norwich making up the playoff places. A big business development in the world of motorsport to report. Formula One owner Liberty Media has bought MotoGP in a deal valued at £3.6 billion. The US media conglomerate took control of Formula One back in 2017, but has purchased the motorbike series from the Spanish company Dorna Sports, which has owned MotoGP since 1992. And from Rugby Union, the news that Leicester Tigers have again been fined for exceeding the Premiership Rugby salary cap. The East Midlands club has been handed a £47,000 overrun penalty for going over the set limit in the 2019-2020 season. Here are the tips then. Pontefract 140, number 2 Federal Envoy, Ludlow 330, number 1 Kestrel Valley.
Rob, thank you. Tomorrow morning, Helen Lewis explores the real stories behind the messages on our phones.
Instant messaging has made our social and professional lives faster, more casual, and more confused.
There was no forward thinking, at least on my part, about any psychological impact on this.
I'm Helen Lewis, and in a new 6-part series, I'll be taking a deep dive into these secret worlds. I'll meet a woman who married a chatbot.
100% I would never go back to humans, ever again.
And discover how military secrets were shared on a forum about a computer game.
Look at me, I've got these secret military documents. Everyone thought, okay, that's cool.
Helen Lewis Has Left the Chat starts on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds tomorrow morning at 9:30.
The time now is 27 minutes to 7. You're listening to Today on BBC Radio 4. Nick Robinson and Martha Carney. Here's Lisa Costello with a summary of the news. At least 6 aid workers have been killed in central Gaza by what their charity says was an Israeli airstrike. They were mostly foreign nationals working for World Central Kitchen. A BBC journalist in Gaza has seen 3 of the bodies and a British passport. The Foreign Office has not confirmed the report. The Australian government has said one of its citizens was killed. The Israeli military says it's conducting a thorough review into what it called a tragic incident. Iran has warned it will punish Israel for an airstrike on the Iranian consulate in the Syrian capital Damascus. 11 people were reportedly killed in the strike, including 2 senior commanders of the Revolutionary Guards. Experts believe they were involved in coordinating Iran-backed groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah. Israel has declined to comment on the attack. The government says more than 150,000 children will benefit from an expansion of free childcare in England. Working parents of 2-year-olds can now access 15 hours of childcare a week during term time, but there are concerns providers won't be able to cope with the demand for places because of the lack of staff and capacity. European